Sophie Cunningham broke down in tears. The truth about Caitlin Clark. There is a moment that happened this season that almost nobody saw. Not on camera, not in a press conference, not in the kind of controlled environment where athletes know how to manage what they reveal. It happened at home, around family, in the kind of room where you don't have to be anyone other than exactly who you are. Sophie Cunningham, one of the most physically imposing, emotionally guarded competitors in the WNBA, sat down with the people who have known her longest, and she tried to explain what it feels like to share a court with Caitlin Clark. She didn't finish the sentence. Before she could get there, everyone in that room was in tears, not from sadness, not from pain. From something that is genuinely difficult to put a name to, something that doesn't show up in box scores or television ratings, something that lives in the space between what sport looks like and what sport actually does to the people inside it. Tonight, we are going inside that moment. What she said, what she saw, and what it reveals about Caitlin Clark that no highlight reel has ever managed to capture. But to understand why Sophie Cunningham's tears mean what they mean, you have to start somewhere most people don't. You have to start with who Sophie Cunningham actually is. Columbia, Missouri is not the kind of place that produces athletes by accident. It is a sports town in the truest sense, a college town built around competition, where the rhythm of the year bends around game schedules, and the gym is not a luxury but a language. Sophie Cunningham grew up speaking that language before she was old enough to know she was learning it. Her father, Rex Cunningham, played professional basketball in Europe. Her mother was a competitive runner. Her siblings competed. The household didn't treat athletics as something you pursued. It was simply what you did, the way some families cook dinner together or go to church. The gym was not a destination for Sophie Cunningham. It was just where life happened. By the time she arrived at the University of Missouri as a freshman, she already carried herself with the certainty of someone who had been preparing for a long time. Not arrogance, certainty. There's a difference, and it matters. Arrogance is loud and demands attention. Certainty is quiet and doesn't need any. She played 4 years for the Tigers, became one of the most decorated players in program history, and left Columbia as the all-time leading scorer. A record built not on raw talent alone, but on the accumulation of thousands of hours of preparation that most people never see and nobody films. What defined Cunningham as a player was a specific combination of qualities that coaches love and opponents dread: relentlessness, physicality, and the kind of competitive fire that does not distinguish between practice and a playoff game. She did not turn it on for big moments and coast through the rest. Every moment was the moment. Every possession deserved everything she had. That is not a common trait, and it is not a comfortable one to live with, but it is the trait that separates the players who are remembered from the players who are merely good. The 2019 WNBA draft came and went with Cunningham's name called by the Phoenix Mercury, and what followed was the slow, demanding process of establishing herself in the professional game. This is the part of the story that cameras rarely follow, because it is not dramatic in the conventional sense. There are no montage moments, no signature games that announce a player's arrival, no viral clips that turn into cultural conversation. There is just the work, the daily grind of becoming a professional athlete in a league full of professional athletes, where everyone around you is also talented, also committed, and also fighting for the same limited space. Cunningham worked. She played physical defense. She hit big shots when the moment required it. She became the kind of teammate that every winning team needs, but that casual fans rarely notice. The one who sets the tone in the locker room, who holds the line when games get hard, who the veterans trust and the younger players look to when the situation is uncertain. She was not a star in the conventional sense. Her name did not headline marketing campaigns. Her face did not appear on the promotional materials that basketball uses to sell itself to the world. But within the culture of the Mercury, and within the broader culture of the WNBA, Cunningham had a reputation that meant something real. She was respected, she was trusted, and she was the kind of person whose emotional responses, when they happened, were not the product of sentiment or performance. Sophie Cunningham is not someone who cries easily. She is not someone who makes a public display of being moved by things. She has spent her entire career building an identity around competitive toughness, around the refusal to be outworked or outfought in any arena, and that identity is not separate from who she actually is. It is who she actually is. When someone like that feels something deeply, it is because the thing genuinely deserves to be felt deeply. Keep that in mind. It matters for everything that comes next. The 2024 WNBA draft arrived the way a weather event arrives. You could see it coming from a long way off, and it still felt bigger than you had prepared for when it finally got there. Caitlin Clark, the most talked-about player in the history of women's college basketball, became the first overall pick of the Indiana Fever. The ceremony itself was almost beside the point. By the time her name was called, the conversation had already been happening for months, about what she would mean for the league, about the records she had broken in college, about the kind of attention she was bringing to a sport that had been asking for exactly this kind of attention for a very long time. Clark went to Indiana. Cunningham remained in Phoenix. They were not teammates. They did not share a practice facility or a locker room or the daily rhythms of preparation that bond players over the course of a long season. But the WNBA is a league of intersections. Teams play each other repeatedly. Practices happen in close proximity during certain windows of the calendar. The distance between franchises in this league collapses in ways that it doesn't in larger leagues, because the league itself is built on a scale that keeps everyone close. And over the course of the season that followed Clark's arrival, Cunningham got close enough to witness something that would not leave her. What does it look like when a player who has spent years sharpening herself against the hardest edges of professional competition suddenly encounters someone operating at a different frequency entirely? Not a different level, a different frequency. That distinction matters. Level implies a hierarchy you can measure. Frequency implies something harder to quantify, something you feel before you can explain it. That is the question this story is actually answering. There is a version of Caitlin Clark that the public knows. The three-point range that extends to distances that have no business being on a basketball court. The logo shots delivered without hesitation, without a hitch, as if the distance is simply not a relevant variable in the calculation. The no-look passes that arrive at their destination before the recipient has fully processed that the ball is coming, that land in hands that weren't yet open, at moments that hadn't yet arrived, because Clark had already mapped the play 3 steps ahead of where it currently was. The scoring records, the crowds, the cultural moment that turned a basketball player into something closer to a movement. But there is another version, the version that her teammates know. And that version is both more ordinary and more extraordinary than the public one, depending on which angle you approach it from. What Clark's teammates and close competitors describe, in the moments when they choose to describe it at all, is not a player who arrives already glowing with greatness and disappears before anyone else wakes up. What they describe is someone who works, someone who arrives early, someone who stays late, someone who treats the preparation with the same intensity that she brings to the actual game, because for Clark there is no separation between those two things. The practice is the game played at full speed with full focus. The film session is the game analyzed with the same urgency as a fourth-quarter timeout. The warm-up routine is run with the same attention as a possession that decides who wins. For a player like Cunningham, who has built her identity on being the hardest worker in every room she has ever entered, encountering that kind of commitment in someone else is not a threatening experience. It is a recognizing one. It is the feeling of seeing a mirror that reflects something you believe about the sport back at you, but in a resolution so sharp and complete that it almost hurts to look at directly. The passes, in particular, are what players who have been around Clark keep coming back to when they try to describe what she does. She sees passing lanes that other players do not register as lanes at all. Not because she has better vision in a physiological sense. She simply processes the geometry of a basketball play at a speed and depth that creates options where other players see closed doors. She sees the space between defenders before the space fully exists. She reads the timing of a cutter's movement, not where the cutter is, but where the cutter is going to be by the time the ball can arrive, and she delivers the ball to that exact location at the exact moment it needs to be there. For the player on the receiving end of one of those passes, the experience is disorienting in the best possible way. You did not know you were open. You took a step, and the ball was already there. She knew you were open before you took the step that made you open. That is not a skill you can practice in isolation. It is the product of a complete integration between observation, processing, and execution. The 3 gears of basketball intelligence running simultaneously at a speed that the game rarely produces. Most players can do all 3 things. Almost no players can do all 3 things at the same time, in real time, under defensive pressure, with a shot clock expiring and a crowd making noise and consequences attached to every decision. Clark does it as a matter of course. It is not her ceiling, it is her floor. And then there is the pressure question. The thing that, more than any statistic or highlight, separates the truly elite from the merely excellent. Most players, even great ones, even players who have been in the league for a decade and seen everything the game can produce, experience pressure as a narrowing. The game speeds up. The available options feel fewer. The decision-making becomes reactive rather than proactive. You stop seeing the full court and start seeing only the immediate problem in front of you, which is exactly the wrong time to stop seeing the full court. Clark experiences pressure as something closer to a sharpening. The bigger the moment, the clearer she seems to see it. The louder the crowd, the quieter the internal calculation appears to become. Players who have competed against her or alongside her in high-stakes situations consistently describe the same phenomenon. She plays her best basketball when the stakes are highest. That is the rarest and most valuable quality a competitor can possess. It cannot be manufactured. It cannot be developed purely through repetition. It is a function of something in the relationship between a player and the game itself. A trust, a comfort, a fluency that makes the noise of the moment feel like signal rather than interference. Every athlete who has been close to genuine greatness can describe a specific moment when the abstract became concrete. Not a general impression of someone's ability, but a singular crystallizing instant when the gap between what you thought you understood and what was actually happening in front of you became impossible to ignore. A moment when the game you thought you knew revealed a dimension you had not previously accessed. For Sophie Cunningham, that moment came from watching Caitlin Clark do something great players do, but do it with a completeness, a grace, and an almost painful precision that made the familiar feel entirely new. Picture a late-game situation. The score is close. Everything that matters is compressed into the next few possessions. The defense has been designed specifically to take away Clark's preferred options, to funnel her left, to crowd the 3-point line, to put bodies between her and the basket, to take away the easy reads and force her into the difficult ones. Every defensive scheme in the WNBA has a version of this plan, because every coach in the league has looked at the film and asked the same question. How do you stop her? The answer that most of them eventually arrive at is that you cannot stop her. You can only make her pay the smallest possible price for what she is going to do regardless. And in that moment, with the defense doing everything right, with the pressure at its highest, with the clock reducing the universe to a small and urgent space, Clark found something. A read that nobody else in the building had made. A pass that arrived so perfectly timed and so precisely placed that the recipient barely had to adjust. The ball was simply there, in the right hands, at the right moment, in the right location. Or a shot released from a distance that defied the architecture of the play. A shot that had no business going in by any reasonable assessment of the geometry. That went in anyway. That is the moment Cunningham carried home, not the celebration that followed, not the highlight clip or the social media reaction or the broadcast call. The moment itself, the human moment, the one that happens in the space of 2 or 3 seconds on a basketball court and contains within it something that is very hard to put into words without sounding like you are exaggerating. She tried anyway. She sat with her family, the people who have known her since she was a child in a gym in Columbia, Missouri. The people who watched her compete before anyone else was watching. The people who have seen her at her most determined and her most vulnerable, who have never needed her to perform anything for them because they already know exactly who she is, completely and without reservation. And she tried to tell them what it was like to be on a basketball court when Caitlin Clark does what Caitlin Clark does. Anyone who has ever tried to communicate a profound experience to someone who is not present will immediately recognize the challenge of that conversation. You have the memory. You have the feeling. But the words keep arriving slightly too small for what you are trying to carry with them. You open your mouth, and what comes out sounds like a description of a basketball play. And you know in your body, in the place where the experience actually lives, that what you witnessed was not a basketball play. It used a basketball play as its medium. It happened in the space between the action and the meaning of the action, in the place where sport and human excellence and the rare privilege of proximity all converge at once. The tears, when they came, were not surprising to anyone who understands what sport can do at its highest level. They were not tears of sadness. They were not tears of inadequacy or defeat or the feeling of being outclassed. They were the tears that come when someone finds the right words for something they have been carrying quietly, and the words, once spoken aloud, reveal the full weight of what was being held. Cunningham was not crying because Clark had done something to her. She was crying because Clark had done something to her understanding of what the sport she had given her entire life to was capable of being. There is a specific kind of beauty in that, a kind of grace in the image of one fierce, dedicated, hard-earned competitor sitting with her family and weeping, not from exhaustion or defeat, but from the overwhelming privilege of having witnessed something extraordinary at close range. Cunningham is not alone in this. She is simply one of the more vivid examples of a pattern that has been playing out across the WNBA since Clark arrived. A pattern in which players whose entire professional identities are built on toughness, composure, and competitive hardness find themselves unexpectedly and genuinely moved by what they experience in Clark's orbit. The league itself has changed in the time since she entered it, not just in terms of the numbers, though the numbers are extraordinary, with the 2024 season averaging 1.3 million viewers per game, the most watched in the league's history. The change runs deeper than that. There is a different energy in the buildings now, a different quality of attention. A sense among the players who have been in the WNBA for years, who fought for every small increment of recognition the league received before Clark arrived, that the door they were knocking on for so long has finally been pushed wide open. Some of those players have complicated feelings about that. The complexity is legitimate, and it deserves to be acknowledged rather than papered over. Veterans of this league put in years of work building the credibility, the competitive excellence, the professional culture that made the WNBA worth paying attention to in the first place. The recognition that came before Clark was hard-won and meaningful. What she brought is not a correction to what came before. It is an addition. And additions, even welcome ones, can carry complicated emotional weight. But within that complexity, something consistent emerges when the players who have been closest to Clark speak honestly about what she brings to the game. There is an appreciation that goes beyond the statistics, an acknowledgement of something in the way she plays that reminds people, veterans and rookies alike, opponents and teammates, of why they fell in love with basketball in the first place. The no-look passes that make arenas gasp. The long-range shots delivered without hesitation at the most consequential moments. The vision that operates on a frequency that other players can see but cannot quite access themselves. These are the things that reduce professional athletes to genuine astonishment. And genuine astonishment, the real kind, not the performed kind, is something that very few things in life can produce in people who have spent decades developing expertise in a field. Clark produces it regularly in people who have every reason to be difficult to impress. There is also the matter of how she conducts herself in the spaces that cameras don't reach. The tunnels, the warm-up sessions, the quiet exchanges before and after games where professional athletes get a chance to show each other who they actually are when the performance is over. What her peers describe is a player who has not confused attention for importance, someone who understands that the volume of noise surrounding her name is not the same thing as the volume of what she has actually earned, and who operates from that understanding in the way she treats the people around her. Genuinely, without the performance of humility that celebrity sometimes produces in people trying to manage their own image, the real version. The kind you can only fake for so long before people who see you every day figure it out. The combination of extraordinary talent and genuine human decency is rarer than it should be. When it exists, when it is real and consistent and not contingent on whether the cameras are rolling, the people who experience it feel it. They carry it with them. And sometimes, when they try to explain what it feels like to someone who wasn't there, they run out of words before they run out of feeling, and what's left comes out as something other than language. Sophie Cunningham has spent her professional life earning respect the hard way. Through competition, through sacrifice, through the accumulated weight of years spent giving everything she had to a sport that does not always give everything back. She knows exactly how hard it is to be good at this game. She knows what it costs. She knows the gap between being talented and being genuinely extraordinary. Because she has lived on the talented side of that gap her whole career and understood it clearly from there. When someone like that is moved to tears talking about a player, the emotion carries a different kind of authority than it would coming from anyone else. It is not the reaction of someone new to the sport encountering greatness for the first time, still calibrating what greatness looks like. It is the reaction of someone who knows exactly how hard greatness is to achieve, who has measured herself against excellence her entire life, and who has now seen it expressed in a way that exceeds even her experienced understanding of what was possible. Step back from the basketball for a moment. Step back from the statistics, the records, the television numbers, the cultural conversation that has surrounded Caitlin Clark since the day she first picked up a ball under national attention. Step back from all of it and consider what is actually being described when Sophie Cunningham sits with her family and cannot finish a sentence without crying. What is being described is impact. Not impact in the promotional sense, not the kind that gets measured in impressions or engagement or quarterly revenue reports. Impact in the oldest and most genuine sense of the word. The kind that one human being produces in another when they do something extraordinary in front of someone who is fully equipped to recognize what they are witnessing. In her rookie season alone, Clark finished as the WNBA's leading scorer. She broke the league's single-season assists record for a rookie. She did these things while being the most closely watched, most intensely defended, most carefully game-planned against player in the league, because every coach in the WNBA had their staff's full attention on the question of how to slow her down, and the answer kept coming back the same way. You don't slow her down. You try to survive the moments when she is unstoppable and hope there are enough other moments to make the difference. But statistics are the smallest part of this story. The numbers tell you she was excellent. They do not tell you what it felt like to be in a gym with her when the crowd wasn't there, and the cameras weren't running and it was just basketball, stripped of everything else. They do not tell you what it felt like to watch her find a read in a late-game situation that no one else in the building had made, and to carry that moment home, and to sit down with the people you love most, and to try to put it into words, and to find that the words are not big enough, and to feel the full weight of what you have been carrying break open in front of the people who know you best. That is what Sophie Cunningham experienced. That is what she tried to describe. And the fact that she couldn't, the fact that the experience exceeded the language available to contain it, might be the most honest thing anyone has said about Caitlin Clark yet. Because the things that genuinely change your understanding of what is possible are rarely the things you can fully explain afterward. They are the things you carry. The moments that live somewhere below language, in the part of you that fell in love with a sport before you could articulate why, and that recognizes something true when it finally sees it expressed completely. Sophie Cunningham saw it, and the tears that followed were not a weakness. They were a measurement.